What's going on, hockey hysterics? Now, every team at the beginning of the year plans to go the distance. They plan to win the Stanley Cup. It doesn't matter what they have on their roster. They look at the playoffs as a stepping stone to get the Stanley Cup, the ultimate prize. You might look at the roster and think, there's no chance that they'll actually make it, but every team has the same goal, to win the Stanley Cup. There's one team that does, but there's a whole bunch of other teams that disappoint. These are the top 5 teams that have disappointed this year. Coming in at number 5 is the New York Islanders. Now, you look at this team, and you look at Matthew Barzal, you look at John Tavares, and they have a really good upside on the offensive end. But you look at the back end with Yaroslav Halakina and the best defenseman being Johnny Boychuk, who was injured for the majority of the year. At the trade deadline was a make or break for the New York Islanders this year, who were supposed to be buyers for getting someone in the back end, whether a defenseman or another goaltender, seeing as they had the worst back end in the entire National Hockey League. And this will also convince John Tavares to stay. If they can make the playoffs and somehow make a solid run to the Cup, that would be a piece that John Tavares would want in the team so he can stay a long contract and go the distance. He wants to win the Stanley Cup. The New York Islanders didn't get someone in the back end, and they're not in the Stanley Cup playoffs, which are huge factors in keeping John Tavares. Will we see him on the team in the next year? They're kind of pushing their luck, aren't they? Coming in at number 4, we have the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, every team has to have a bad year, no matter if you're Crosby, Ovechkin, Kane, Taves, Stamkos. Every team eventually has to have a slump. I mean, look at the Leafs. They've been having a slump for 50 years. The Montreal Canadiens haven't been able to reach the finals in 20 years. Islanders are still in a slump. There's just been so many teams that were once so good that had a break from stardom, fame, everything of the sorts. And Chicago's kind of on that trend right now, that they have a great team still, but their team's getting older, more talent's been coming into the league through the drafts with McDavid, Matthews, McKinnon. All these players are adding factors against their team as they start to age. They traded off Panarin, who was a huge asset to this team, and he was a young asset. So I'm not quite sure why the Chicago Blackhawks did that the other year, but it seems to be really affecting them. For them not to even have a chance to go into the Stanley Cup Finals or to go even to the playoffs is very disappointing. You would like to see a team who's won multiple Stanley Cups have a push for it, even if they're just knocked out a little bit. But Chicago just wasn't there at all this year, and that is why they are a huge disappointment. Coming in at number 3, we have the Montreal Canadiens. Now, Carey Price got injured, Shea Weber got injured. Yeah, we know, but 2 players should not be the reason why your team struggles. I mean, you look at the offensive end for Montreal, there wasn't much of anything there. Price was always overworked. He got so much on his plate that there's no way that him by himself can push this team from going in the gutter to the Stanley Cup final. It just won't happen. And just the moves that they've been making in the past few years have really caught up with them, with PK going to Nashville, not signing Radulov, him going to Dallas, not signing Markov, him going off to free agency and then not even signed by a team. You had these players, and then you signed some strange ones like Aldner, who you don't need a big guy in the back end, you need a faster guy in the back end. Because you got Shea Weber, he's your big guy. You have Petrie, he's your big guy. But you're not adding any young talent to your team. You're not adding any strong defensive core. You have Mete, who's in the minors, who's going to be a really good player, but still not developed yet. And just some strange decisions made by the Montreal Canadiens team that put them from stardom to not a chance for the playoffs anymore. Should be an interesting offseason for Montreal, seeing as Tavares is probably going to try free agency. Let's see how hard they try to get him for a number 1 center, but keep in mind, he wants to go to a Stanley Cup winning team. He wants to have a chance to go into the playoffs for the Stanley Cup. Montreal, I say, is far from there, maybe like a few years away from there, with developing new players, with getting draft picks, etc. Coming in at number 2, we have the Edmonton Oilers. Now, at the beginning of the year, it'd be very hard to say that Edmonton would not make the playoffs, let alone collapse in on itself. But thus, this is the NHL. Best teams in the world are going to get past you somehow if you don't put in the effort needed. And it's not a McDavid problem. It's not a coaching problem. It's a whole team problem that really just kind of bit them in the butt. Yet certain players that didn't produce this year, Patrick Maroon, who got traded to New Jersey, who is now in the playoffs. You traded also Taylor Hall to New Jersey, who is now in the playoffs. Jordan Eberle went to New York Islanders, but he's a key point of your team. He was a great passer, a great playmaker that you wanted on your team, and Edmonton just didn't have it. Your passer was Milan Lucic, who was an enforcer and still is an enforcer that's getting paid a lot of money. It's almost like paying Ty Domi that type of money, or Bob Probert. Lucic never really had a stellar 30-goal, 40-goal year to be getting paid that type of money. You can get someone the same price for maybe $3 or $4 million less than what you're paying Lucic there. Edmonton had this ego going into the season that they'd be a juggernaut out there and they had potential to win the Stanley Cup. That cockiness has kind of overlapped on itself and made them miss the playoffs, and that is why they are disappointing. The number one team on this list is the Ottawa Senators. Now, it goes back to last year too, how Ottawa was 1 goal away from going to the Stanley Cup Finals against Nashville. Of course, they lost in overtime to Pittsburgh, who ended up going to win the Stanley Cup. But just the whole drama of Ottawa this year has been a huge disappointment. From almost going to the Stanley Cup Finals to not being a contender in the playoffs to location talk to switching out teams talk to owner talk to Carlson leaving talk to trade deadline to now July 1st where there's going to be the draft and trades happening. Ottawa has just been a story of awful this past year. They went from a Cinderella story to just awful. Who do you think should be on this list? Let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and to smash that like button. Okay guys, you have a great day.